I found his comments unfair. I found them insulting.
One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach.
Canadian leaders, both Liberals and Conservatives, are responding to Donald Trump's threat that he is going to impose a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada. So in this video, I'm going to get to a few of those reactions, as well as Trump's Truth Social threat that went out. And let's just start off right off the bat here with the actual impact of a tariff, because there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding about what this actually means, particularly for American consumers, because they're the ones that are going to be hitting or getting the brunt of any kind of tariff. So Vox has a good breakdown here. Several places have good breakdowns, but I'll just reference theirs. So Dean Baker, who's a senior economist at the Center for Economic Policy Research, told Vox, quote, "The tariffs a tax on imports. What happens is when the goods come in at the ports, we tax them, but that tax isn't levied against the company or government that exports them. It's paid by the U.S. company that imports the items." So while this still will have, a negative impact on Canada in terms of potential job losses, again, if this does go through in any sort of long-term way, and the other potential impact there being retaliatory tariffs, the actual direct, immediate impact of something like this will be on the U.S. consumer having to pay for the higher prices. So as they write here, that tax either gets absorbed by the importers or more likely passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Now, as I said, Trump's idea here is that this is going to boost domestic business. That's why he's doing it. So essentially trying to disincentivize American companies from importing and increasing their manufacturing within the U.S. But that isn't currently set up, and it's hard to know how long something like this will actually be in place, meaning will these companies want to invest in that sort of homegrown manufacturing if they don't see this as a long-term thing. So it will essentially, the tariffs could cause price hikes on American imports and exports. And this is just, the U.S. isn't in the situation where they're able to completely replace, in any kind of quick, easy way, the imports of the products that they are bringing in. It's just a very bizarre policy to just across the board, 25% on everything, which is why I tend to think this is not going to happen. I think Trump is more using this as sort of either a bargaining chip or a way to try and at least make it appear that Mexico and Canada are doing something about the border, as we'll get to his Truth Social post here. Make it appear that they are doing something so he can say, hey, look what I did. I got Canada and Mexico to strengthen the border, even if it's, a couple more guards or something. But he goes on to write here, as everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada. Everyone's aware of this. It's news to me. Bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico composed of thousands of people seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. Speaking of the caravan, like it's the smoke monster in Lost. On January 20th, it's one of the many first executive orders. I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the U.S. and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long-simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. This idea that, it's so easy to stop, the underground drug trade. Then why didn't you stop it when you were president? It's just such a bizarre thing to do here. This really seems, more like maybe a way to hurt people that didn't support him while he was president, opposed to anything else. But this gets to the claims he's making here. So as CBC News writes, the irregular migration through Canada to the U.S. has multiplied in recent years. So does Trump have a point? Well, among all the people stopped by U.S. Border Patrol trying to enter the U.S. in between checkpoints last year, cases on the Canadian side amounted to barely 1% of the total. So this idea that what people are fleeing Canada to enter the U.S. is news to everyone involved. But that's what Trump is trying to claim there. Let me first get to Trudeau's response, and then I'll get to the Conservatives, which to me crack me up. But here is Trudeau.
Obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call. This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works. That's where, putting aside partisanship, that's where I reached out immediately to Doug Ford to agree with him that we would have a First Ministers meeting.
All right, so a little reaction there. Trudeau is clearly trying to not hurt Trump's feelings. He wants to keep things steady. He doesn't want to inflame anything, so he's just keeping it level. Oh, we had a good conversation. You know, he's not going to come out publicly as the prime minister and just lambaste Trump for obvious reasons that Trump is a man baby and that will make things worse. Before I get to Doug Ford, since Trudeau brought up Doug Ford there, one of the biggest issues that I run into when researching a story is knowing if I'm getting the full picture. So having quick access to a variety of sources and their political leanings helps out quite a bit. That's why I use Ground News. So Ground News is an app and website that brings together related stories in one place to highlight important perspectives often overlooked in mainstream media. Every story comes with a visual breakdown of the political bias, reliability, and ownership, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, when Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy were given the reins to reshape the U.S. federal government, you can see how many sources covered it, along with their political leanings and the overall bias distribution. And then you can actually go and see how differently it was covered depending on the source. Right-wing outlet Breitbart called it the plan to drain the swamp, while left-leaning PBS NewsHour detailed the potential pitfalls. Go to ground.news/Rational National or scan the QR code for 50% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. This is a limited-time Black Friday sale. Here is Doug Ford in 2016 saying he will never waver in his support of Donald Trump.
Are you still a supporter of Donald Trump?
Absolutely. I wouldn't waver. Like the GOP's wavering, I wouldn't waver.
Right. So that is the Ontario Premier back in October 2016. Well, he's not happy now. So here he is discussing Trump's threats.
I found his comments unfair. I found them insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. I spent a lot of time in the U.S., and I have yet to talk to one American that has any issue with Canadians. To President-elect Trump, there's no closer ally, there's no other country in the world that has stood shoulder to shoulder with our American counterparts, our friends, our family. It's an insult to the 900,000 Americans that are living here in Canada. It's an insult to the 9 million Americans that wake up every single morning to produce products to ship up to Ontario alone. Yes, it will hurt Canada. Yes, it will hurt Ontario, but it will hurt Americans. It will hurt their economy when 9 million Americans don't wake up to produce products for Ontario and Canada.
How things change. So it's important to note here. The way that potentially impacts Canada, at least directly, immediately, putting aside potential retaliatory tariffs, is that just under 2 million Canadians, either directly or indirectly, their jobs are dependent on exports to the U.S. So there's some potential job losses there, which seems more likely if this is a long-term thing as opposed to maybe just right now it's just a threat, so nothing's happening. But if there is a long-term impact of this, those jobs will be impacted. And the also potential on impact or the impact on the Canadian dollar, which already took a dip in the wake of the news, though has jumped up since then. But this gets to the impact on, in a specific case, potentially on Americans. As Bean and Bloomberg here writes, Canada's oil patch warns Trump's tariffs would raise U.S. gasoline prices. So the U.S. imports almost 4 million barrels of relatively cheap Canadian crude a day. For Canada, energy products have accounted for about a third of its exports to the U.S. in recent years, the largest in a single category. So while oil and gas were excluded from tariffs in Trump's first administration, this apparently is going to impact all products, which would include, in this case, oil and gas, which would result in higher gasoline and energy costs to American consumers. Trump hurting Canada by introducing a gas tax on Americans. Interesting approach here to foreign policy with your close neighbors, but we'll see how it works out for you. Now, I want to get to the reaction. If I can find my mouse here, here it is. From Pierre Poilievre. So David Boudouin, I believe is how you pronounce that, writing on Twitter here. This is sarcastically, just to be clear. Showing his prime ministerial chops, Pierre Poilievre calls on Justin Trudeau to, quote, put partisanship aside and in the spirit of Team Canada, do everything I tell you to do. For example, axe the carbon tax, cancel the emission caps, cancel all tax increases, do other things that Harper did but you can't do. That's how you put partisanship aside in the spirit of Team Canada. It is wild. I guess it's not wild. It's expected. If you know anything about Pierre Poilievre, just to see him use this as an opportunity to slam Trudeau while trying to talk up the importance of working together. Oh yeah, I'm also noting here, I put him on 1.5 speed because nobody wants to hear Pierre Poilievre at 1.0 speed. So just to speed this up a little bit.
To start with, on the economy, I'm calling on Prime Minister Trudeau to put partisanship aside and in the spirit of Team Canada to accept that he cannot go ahead with quadrupling the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. This was an irresponsible policy to begin with, but combining this kind of crippling energy tax increase with potential tariffs from Donald Trump would push our economy into a nightmare and a tailspin. So let's put partisanship aside and axe the tax. Second.
I keep playing this, but it's the same. You just read it. It's like, put partisanship aside after I tell you to do what I've been trying to tell you to do for, the past 2 years, which is a boogeyman, as has been described many times. Carbon pricing is not to blame for Canada's affordability challenges. I broke this down in a video this past week, like a few days ago. So I'm not going to go through it again. I'll link to the video below. But just check the link. You can read through it yourself. Essentially, most Canadians get rebates that are more than what they pay through any kind of carbon tax. So in their data from Stats Canada, latest data, we estimate the median annual net cost of carbon tax for households in Ontario in 2023 was negative, around minus 300, meaning that most households received $300 more in rebates than they paid in carbon taxes. But this is Poilievre's whole identity is oil and gas and the carbon tax, and he has nothing else to add to the conversation. But again, as crazy as Trump is, I think this is just a way for him to try and claim a win when Canada responds by saying what they're going to do about the border. And Trump can say, hey, look at that. They luckily, with my negotiation with my negotiation skills, I was able to get them to do something that they weren't doing before. Like that, I think that's going to be the extent of this. I'm not saying this is not going to happen. It could potentially, I think it can, of course, happen completely. It's also possible it's not going to include oil and gas, which is the biggest export from Canada to the U.S., but maybe on other products, as happened during his presidency in the first time. So, I'm not saying there's no tariff. What I'm saying is right now this is a threat. Nothing's happened yet. We're going to see what the reaction is from Canada and Mexico. And I tend to think this is going to be at least partly resolved before inauguration. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.